guys. So today I want to talk to you about the base elements in their basest form. And I talk about all five, not just the four. So I'm going to give you basically the rundown of the elements in the first dimension. I'm going to do this for all of the dimensions because I find this to be absolutely fascinating. This is something that recently um, I have delved into, and feel like this is a way for us to better understand. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I have a fan in my bathroom that automatically turns on whenever it senses specific things, or so it seems. I think it's literally just a distraction. It creates noise, which inhibits my ability to be able to, focus without distraction. You know what I mean? It does exactly what it's supposed to do, I guess. Anyway, going back to the elements. Okay, so I want to talk about the elements, and I want to talk about the five elements in each of the dimensions because this is super fascinating. It gives us a better understanding of our journey of evolution on a cosmic scale, not necessarily just as a human, because if you think about it, like every single one of us is ascending, but we don't just ascend past the human experience, right? We don't just become a soul out of nowhere. It's literally a process of formation into soul all the way up to formation into star, also your ascension to the highest of the highest realms. Okay. The reason why is because we're expanding as a universe, but we can't just create stars out of nothingness. Somebody has to control those stars because the entire universe is controlled. So I'd like to put it to you before we start talking about the elements in this kind of like pyramid kind of understanding. Okay. So if we look at the central sun as the central power source, okay, just from the perspective of looking at this from a scientific perspective, okay? No spirituality in it, literally just talking about elements, energy sources, because that's what elements are, energy sources. So if we look at the base of the universe, the energetic source of all life, that would be the base universe, the central sun, aka what we would consider the location of the Big Bang. Okay. And we know that when that happened, it happened because of transformation from the first dimension to the second dimension. Okay. But what does that mean? Okay, so let's look at it from a scientific and spiritual perspective now. 1D is basically power without control. Okay. And I spoke yesterday about a cycle. And the cycles, you have a certain amount of time to get through each dimension before the cycle resets. If you have not evolved past that thing, that means you are not ready. And so you reset into that cycle. This is absolutely necessary, especially when we're talking about primordial control. Okay. So think about it this way. Um, a reset happens. We're going to look at it from a reset perspective because um, we're not talking about the very distant past in the Big Bang. 444, we're talking about this. Okay, we're talking about the creation of a new soul, which would be the end of one, the beginning of another. When one steps off, one steps on, kind of thing. This is all about weight. Um, all about weight. Because the universe has to be perfectly balanced and weighted in order to be able to work in the direction the way that it does, right? If we're looking at it solely from a scientific perspective, the math always has to math. One always has to equal 1 plus 0, right? And two is always, it always has to be 1 plus 1. Okay, or any derivative that will equal 2, like 1.5 plus zero point 0.5 equals 2. So there's always going to be, it always has to equal 1 or 2. The equal sign has to match or it all falls apart, which is exactly why 1.44 is so important. I have um, been talking about that a lot lately. I'm pretty sure that that's like the, I don't know, I want to say atomic weight. That's what it feels like. Like the atomic weight has to be, or the balance has to be 1 to a ratio of 0.44. 144 is the number that it has to be. Like 1 is the absolute, and then the 0.44 is the rest of us in order to balance out that 1. Make sense? Somehow, some way, the maths. I don't claim to know all the math. I just understand how it works. So if we're looking at it from purely scientific perspective, you cannot move past the first dimension until the math adds up. How does the math add up? Balance. The balance between burn and destroy, like cleanse and destroy. Okay, if we're just looking at fire, okay, there's a huge balance between cleanse and destroy, right? Think about any kind of fire. If you are not controlling that fire and it somehow gets out of its containment, it can destroy, right? Power without control is the first dimension. We don't even have to look at it just as like fire. Look at it at all the different elements, okay? If we look at it from the perspective of water, water without containment is destructive. It is both a life-giving and life-taking force. Tsunamis, rivers, same exact force, two totally different controls, right? A tsunami is without control, whereas a river flows in order to bring life-giving force to that area, right? So again, the balance between destruction and life-giving, life-taking, life-giving. This is your first dimension, power without control. Okay. So when we go to air, air is the exact same. And think about that from the perspective of the atmosphere. Without the atmosphere, the solar winds would destroy us. The atmosphere becomes a barrier. So it is not only a form of movement, it is also a form of protection. So again, the balance between destruction and protection. Okay. So each one has its particular control that it lands into, right? So, like, fire can either destroy or cleanse, and it can also bring energy, like information. So, fire transmits information. All of these can transmit information. They really can. But if you look at it from the perspective of, yeah, fire can either destroy or cleanse, water can either destroy or give life, air can either destroy or create a barrier. And then, of course, we have earth, which can, you know, basically destroy or form itself to become ground. So, destroy, and I explained this to my son the other day. If we look at like form or earth in its basis of non conscious being, um, or even like we look at like a solar system at the highest level of the soul, the first dimension piece of the soul that has been scattered and is aimlessly wandering. the fragmented pieces of the soul at a 1D level or even a 2D level would be like your meteor just barreling through space at the mercy of gravity because it has absolutely no conscious control. So it was in the primordial soup, it became form and then was fragmented. And now that it's fragmented, it is no longer, it has to be pulled back into a major body in order to be able to ascend. Make sense? Same thing happens with your soul. If, for example, you follow, we'll just put it to you this way. If there was, we all know that there was a possibility of life on Mars many, whatever cycles ago. But if there's the possibility that the life that was on Mars was disrupted by an outside force, maybe like, for example, a solar wind that destroyed it, 1111 when I said that. So, and maybe it was like a solar wind that destroyed the atmosphere. All of those souls that were unascended at the time of the ending of life on that planet basically got blasted out into the universe, fragmented from their original soul. Okay. Because in order to ascend, one must have a body. And if one is violently ripped from the body, the soul, this is where we get the understanding of ghosts. They have unfinished business is basically what it is. So like if a catastrophe like cataclysm happens, like there's an asteroid belt that we fly through. Why is there an asteroid belt there? Was there a planet there at one point in time that got blasted? If there was a planet there that got blasted, what happened to all of the souls on that planet? All of those souls would have been fragmented, just like the pieces of the planet itself, which planets are conscious, right? It is a form of the soul. It is a dimensional form of the soul, two dimensional, right? If it got blasted, that means that bits and pieces of that soul got blasted into space. So those meteors, those formless pieces of rock or consciousless pieces of rock that are floating around in space, they're not just rock, they're a part of a fragmented soul. Okay. So when we look at it from the perspective of the dimensions, like each and every single one of us has gone through this particular ascension process in order to be in the physical 3D at this time. We had to have transcended the first and second dimensions. You don't just become a soul at third dimension. You have to be able to have control in order to be able to come into form. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because it lights up my entire world. Okay. So understanding 1333, by the way, understanding life from the perspective of it's not just a human existence. This is the evolution of your entire soul, and looking at it from a much larger cosmic proportion, you can see that evolution isn't necessarily a physical only kind of thing. It's all five of the elements. Okay. So let's talk about that fifth one. The fifth one is known as the ether, or what the the physics field wants to call dark matter. It's not actually dark matter. Yes, it's a kind of web, but it's consciousness. In the first dimension, it is untethered consciousness, meaning it has no connection to anything. It isn't until it is under control that it is considered to be actual consciousness. So it is this sleeping consciousness. It is connected, but it has no idea that it is connected. It has no idea that it is connected to all of those other four elements. It has no idea that it has control over those four elements. This is a part of your awakening at every dimension, learning how to control yourself, find balance for yourself at that dimension. Now, I know it might not seem like it's important to understand what you had to go through at the first and second dimension because you made it to the third dimension, but that's not true. If you give yourself credit as a soul for what you have already learned and understood to be wisdom, it can help you because the lessons are the same in every dimension. You just do it in a different form. They're all the same. You have to go through every single one of the steps in order to ascend to the next level. Okay, so think about it from this perspective. When you look at the zodiac signs, the zodiacs are in order for a reason. Guess which one of the very first elements that is? Fire. Why? Because if you do not control your burn, you will destroy everything first. This is the one where you have to be reset quite a bit because you lose your control. And if you don't have control, you destroy everything. So you go through each of these stages as you go through each of these dimensions. That's why it's 12 times 12. There are 12 phases through every one of the dimensions. That includes your elemental dimensions, right? Your elements have to go through 3 trials each in order to be able to ascend. Your soul is the one that is doing all 3 trials each of all of these elements. Okay? So if you look at it from a zodiac perspective, your soul, your zodiac is your soul zodiac. I'm not saying that your zodiac doesn't change as you go along, because it does, because as you go along and do your different lives, you have to experience and ascend that particular zodiac every single lifetime, right? So if you look at it from a first dimensional perspective, okay, let's take this as cycles, not lifetimes, because again, the only thing that's like limited like that would be this particular dimension. Okay, so it's completed in cycles. And a cycle is dependent upon the level of which you are. Okay, so a first dimensional cycle will not be the same as a third dimensional earth cycle. Third dimensional earth cycle is based upon our our cycle, our particular clock. They all go 12 by 12, with 13 being the reset day, the day of the test, the day that you decide or that you find out whether or not you are moving up to the next level, whether or not you achieved the closing of a cycle. Okay? These cycles are not like just one giant huge thing. They're sorry. Sometimes there's a little bit of a glitch that happens here because um, what I understand here doesn't quite compute here yet. It's still trying to catch up. It's still trying to understand what it is that um, the soul already understands. Um, so let's talk again about the 12 dimensions within the 12 dimensions. Make sense? Okay. Let's go ahead and say the 12 phases within the 12 dimensions. How about that? So if we look at it from this perspective of the zodiac alone, there's 12 signs, right? And they say there's 12 dimensions, right? So I'm starting to think that maybe it's actually 14 because we have 2 rest days, 2 rest periods. Okay. So we have a rest at the beginning. And if we look at this through the moon cycle, we have the new moon. The first day of the new moon is a rest period. The very second day of the full moon, I'm sorry, the new moon, 11/11 and 1/11 when I was talking about this. That's crazy. Okay. So when we're talking about the full moon cycle, okay, the very first day is a free day. And we're talking about from the new moon through till the new moon. It's a 28-day cycle. 14 days between new moon and full moon at their fullest, right? Their most direct. At their most direct is 14 days. Okay. The first day of direct is free. The next 12 days are work days. And I say work days because this is during the time when you're healing, you are learning, you are gaining wisdom. And then at the end of those 12 days, you have 2 days of rest, the 14th day and then the first day, which would actually be the 14th counting down. So if we look at it from the perspective of 1 through 14, 14 through 1, days 1 and 14 are always rest days. Make sense? So you have 1 through 14, 14 through 1. So you have 2 days of 1 on either end, 2 days of 14 in the middle. Okay? Yeah? Does that track? I think so. I went through kindergarten math. I think I worked it out. So if we're looking at the 2 days in the middle and 2 days on the end, we have a 14-day period, but only 12 days of work. The 2 days in between is our reset period. And I want to say that reset period on purpose. So if you were to sit there and download a whole bunch of information and then delete a whole bunch of information from your computer and not do a scan disk drive at the end of 2 weeks, you might have a little bit of holes in your hard drive that aren't able to be filled with new information. That 2 days of rest, the reset period, is the time for you to integrate everything you learned over the last cycle, the 12 segment cycle, whatever that 12 segment cycle is. Okay. And the size of your reset period is based upon the cycle you just completed. So if you completed a moon cycle, your rest period is equivalent to that of a moon cycle rest period. If it is a solar cycle, your rest period is equivalent to that solar cycle rest period. If it's a universal reset period, they coincide and they align on certain dates that are extremely important. When those dates align, those are like the final exam. You have little tests throughout the year, right? Your monthly test is your zodiac sign of that month, right? Whatever it is that's in that zodiac sign that you need to work on personally, that's your lesson. At the end of the year, you get your, did you graduate this year? Or are you going to redo this year? That's your final exam. Did you learn all of the lessons of the zodiac that were pointed towards you for this particular level of your ascension? Did you follow all of those zodiac? Were you conscious enough to sit down at the beginning of the month with the astrology and say, oh, hey, Leo is focused on this, this, and this. I'm going to go within myself and see what is it that I need to work on that's in Leo season. Or based on the moon, if you want to do shadow work is perfectly well done by the moon because the moon is there to reveal our shadows, right? The sun is there to reveal the love in our life. The moon is there to reveal the shadows in our life. That's why it's important to do both sun and moon sign. Okay. Now, let's talk about it from the first dimension again. Okay. At the first dimension, every single month in the zodiac is based in an element. So as you're going through your cycles, because remember, based on where you are is based on your cycle. First dimension, if you are primordial, you're at the universal cycle level. You're not at a human cycle level, which would be a year, a solar year, because usually we don't last to an entire universal year, right? So we are on the solar cycle. Whereas the primordial, that's at your cosmic level. You are going to be going on a cosmic cycle. Okay? How many times you rotate around the central sun? Those are much longer. So those cycles last a lot longer because these lessons you're learning at this cosmic scale are much harder. You think that 3D Earth is hard? Imagine having absolutely no control but absolute power and having to learn how to control it without any form of control. I'm reminded of the genie. Absolute cosmic power. Beast. When you have absolute cosmic power, you're watched like a fucking hawk. But you also have to be able to be balanced out. Meaning there has to be somebody that is more powerful than you that can shut you down immediately if you start to cause problems. These are reset periods. If you get to a point where you have lost absolute control, you are reset so that you learn control. You are not given access to higher power without learning control. It is not a matter of proving whether or not you're worthy. It's a matter of proving or whether or not you're ready. So at the primordial level, you fight a lot. You are battling for control. Think about all of the stories, the mythological stories you've heard about the primordials. Think about it. They're always so violent, so quick to anger because they have no control. Me personally, I have memory of my first sign, my first elemental primordial being, fire. I remember what it felt like to have absolute power and absolutely no control. I also remember making the decision that I wanted to have control, and I turned that absolute power into absolute love, which is exactly what we do when we transcend the first dimension. Recognize love. Without love, we are control. Our first step, our first step in ascension is going home. That's when we make that first ultimate sacrifice. That's what love is all about, the ultimate sacrifice. Are you willing to walk through fire for yourself and for your faith? As fire, I was absolutely willing to do that. The other elements are the exact same. They have to realize love in order to be able to find control. So the first one that you go through is your fire element because it's the most destructive and it's easier to reset. Oop, well, you tried to burn up the universe. Let's rewind and start over again. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. No need to be upset. You're just starting off from square one back to square one, right? You cannot learn the most basic instinct of that control. The very first thing you have to learn is love. When you learn love at the first dimension, this shows that Earth is the first basest level of firsty, and I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I believe it is power. I mean, um, fire. Because once you recognize your fire, then you can learn your water. Okay. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and see uh, in order of zodiac. Fire, earth, water, or air, water. Okay, this makes sense. Okay. So, all right. So once you learn control, you learn form. Makes sense, right? You learn how to ground your energy from the fires, emerges the form. Think about like lava. When the volcano erupts, the lava forms a solid ground, right? The center, the core of the planet is fire. What keeps her going? Then you add the density on top of that. When we're talking about density, the number is how dense. And as the number goes up, it's less dense. So when we're talking about density, we're talking about heaviness, right? We're also talking about how much material is wrapped around it, the very core of the soul. At the 1D, there is no form, there is no control. It's just a vast open void. And so if you want to look at it like everything and nothing, there is no containment at the 1D. There is no form at the 1D. When you start to form, that's when you go into the 2D. You have to go through all of these zodiacs, 1 through 12. Hmm. I just thought about something else. How many trials did Hercules have? 12. 12. Okay. How many trials did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? 11. Is the Trojan War on there? No. It would be 12 trials because of the beginning in the Trojan War. Right? Okay. Hmm. It doesn't give me a very good answer. It's not getting what I'm trying to say. Apparently the hero's journey has 12 trials too. So, well, the number. Just saying. Okay. Let's talk about this. Okay, so I'm not 100% sure what the 12 trials of the first dimension would be. Let's see if we can find out from oh, you know what? I think it actually does this. Inertia and the fear of instability. At this raw state, Earth traps you in isolation. Overcome the void's pull toward immobility by introducing intention. Without this, you're stuck in the basest of the base element, forever grounded in survival mode, unable to form complexity. Oh, look at that. Hmm. This grounds the ascent, preventing the star from collapsing into chaos. Beyond the star, Earth becomes a cosmic dust, seeding new worlds in infinity. Mhm. Okay, water. What has to be overcome? Dissolution and emotional overwhelm. The soup's unpredictability amplifies water's tendency to erode identity. Oh, like river eroding the stone. Transcend this by channeling flow into purpose, lest it floods the void and prevents any cohesion. Hmm, makes sense. Fire, what needs to be overcome? Consumption and rage. Fire's basest form burns without control, scorching the primordial mix. Overcoming this volatility by harnessing will, or it reduces everything to the void again. And then air, detachment and superficiality. Air's raw state scatters focus, preventing depth. Transcend by grounding ideas in action, or the void's vastness turns into aimless noise. And then the last, the ethereal, the unifying void. What needs to be overcome? Illusion and disconnection. At its basis, ether fosters isolation in the void. Transcend by recognizing interconnectedness, or the soup remains undifferentiated forever. That's super awesome. I love it. Okay, so we discussed the elements and their basis of forms in the first dimensional. Okay, this is at the cosmic level. Okay, when we talk about 1D, we are talking about macro universe. Primordial seas are not tiny, they're expansive, very expansive. Okay, so you actually have to control yourself in the largest of largest forms prior to being able to control yourself in that teeny tiny little body you're in right now. When you are thinking about the size of a planet, your body is tiny, very tiny. So you have to learn how to contain cosmic universal power in a tiny little form, this box that you're in right now, which is why you have to transcend that box in order to transcend the third dimensional reality. So, when we are talking about you as a soul, we are not talking about you as a human. We are talking about your journey as a soul from the 1D, the tippy tippy top. what I call the 0.99. Have a good one, guys.